Welcome to Chapter 4 review for Algebra 2. Yay! So let's get started with the study guide. A lot of this is going to be a review from the quiz, so I would recommend doing that study guide again, which you can watch the video from the prior study guide. Exciting. Okay, so let's dive in. So let's start with number 1. It says write the equation of the function in vertex form, then identify the vertex. So our first step is to we first have to identify the vertex before we can get it in vertex form. So I like to just identify all of my values. I know that A is -2, B is 8, and C, which is my constant, is 23. Okay, so with that, what we're going to take is we are going to use our formula to find the vertex. So remember, the x value of the vertex is the opposite of b all over 2a. Okay, so with that, what we're going to do is we're just going to plug in our values. Opposite of b, so opposite of 8 times 2 times -2, which is our a value. So when we simplify this, -8 times, or divided by 2 times -2, which is -4, gets me a +2. And so remember, that's my x value, but when we're doing vertex, it's also my h value. So we know h is equal to 2. So interchangeable, x is the same as h. It's just h represents the x value of the vertex. So now that we have the h value of the vertex, or the x value of the vertex, we can solve for y by plugging it in. So f of x, remember, f of x, it's the same as y. So interchangeable, doesn't matter, it's the same thing. One's just function, one's just y. So I am going to plug into my original equation, -2. I'm going to plug in 2. So 2 squared plus 8 times 2 plus 23. So -2 times 4. Now remember, super important, because a lot of you guys make this error. We first do exponents. Remember, we have GEMDOS or PEMDOS, whichever one. So we first do exponents and then we multiply. So it'd be 2 squared, which is 4, and then we multiply that times -2. And then we have 16 plus 23, so -8 plus 16 plus 23, which gets me a y value of 31. Now, just like over here, our x value is the same as h for our vertex. Our y value is the same as k, yikes, for our vertex. I need to use a different pen. Okay, so now that we have our h value, our k value, and our a value, which we had from just looking at the equation, we can plug that into our vertex form. Remember, vertex form is f of x is equal to a times x minus h squared plus k. So into our equation, we're going to plug in a, which we already found. So this a value is going to be the same a value here. So -2, x stays put, minus my h value, which is 2 squared, plus 31. And so that's my equation, that's my answer. And it does say identify the vertex. I didn't leave a spot for that. So the vertex, we already found 231. And that concludes number 1. So on to number 2. I changed my pen color because my blue was driving me crazy. So number 2, Very similar to number 1. So find the vertex, axis of symmetry, x and y intercepts, then graph the function. If necessary, round your answers to 2 decimals. So same type of process. I'm going to identify all of my values. I have a is -2, b is -1, and c is 4. So I'm going to first just start by solving for my vertex. So opposite of b, just like we did up above, opposite of b, so opposite of -1 all over 2 times a, which is -2. So negative and negative cancels to become a positive, and then 2 times -2 gets me -4. So my x value of my vertex is -1/4. So I have my x value, or again, my h value of my vertex. So now I can solve for my y value by plugging it back into the equation. So y is equal to -2 times -1/4 squared minus -1/4 plus 4. So I just plugged that into my calculator. I use 0.25 and I plugged that, or -0.25 into my calculator and solved that. So when I solved, I got 33/8, which is fine if you write it as 33/8, or if you prefer decimal, it would be 4.125. Now, the reason why I say, the reason why I even change it to decimal, because typically I prefer fractions, is we're going to be graphing this. So to me, it's easier to think about where's 4.125 on the graph versus where's 33/8. So that means my k value, which is the same as my y value of my vertex, is 4.125. Okay, so that solves for my vertex, which is at -1/4 and 33/8, or you can write it all decimal, -0.25, comma 4.125. So either one is totally fine. I don't mind going from decimals or fractions. Now, my axis of symmetry. My axis of symmetry, remember, is my x value of my vertex. So my x value of my vertex is -1/4, so my axis of symmetry is x is equal to -1/4. I'm going to skip my x-intercept for a minute, and I'm just going to go into my y-intercept. My y-intercept, remember, the y-intercept is easy. My y-intercept is my c value. So my c value is 4, so that means that my y-intercept is also 4. So we would write that as an ordered pair, 0, 4. If you just wrote 4, that's fine too. It's not a big deal. Okay, so then now on to the x-intercepts. So first, for our x-intercepts, that means we are setting y equal to 0. And so at this point, I thought, okay, can I factor this? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, I cannot factor this. So when you can't factor, or even if you just don't want to factor, you can just solve using the quadratic formula. So x is equal to the opposite of b, so the opposite of -1 is +1, plus or minus the square root of b squared. So that's -1 squared, which is 1, minus 4ac all over 2a. So when I multiply this out, so 4 times -2 times 4, which that gets me 1 minus -32 over -4. Now that negative and negative become a positive. So it's 1 plus or minus rad 33 over -4. So at this point, what I would do is I would simply just plug that into my calculator. I would plug in 1 plus rad 33 over -4, and that gets me -1.69. And then I would plug in 1 minus rad 33 over negative 4, which gets me 1.19. So either way you want to write your x-intercepts is totally fine. You could write it as 1 plus or minus rad 33 over negative 4, or you could write it as the decimal. So either way, I don't mind. I'm not going to be picky there. So now we have everything and we can start to graph. So my vertex is probably the first point I'm always going to graph. It's at negative 1/4 and 4.125. So I know I don't obviously have a quarter marked in here, so what I'm just going to do is kind of go over a little bit and up to 4.125, just above 4. My y-intercept is at 4, which really doesn't give us any points. Awesome. And then I'm going to plot my other points. So negative 1.69 is basically about there. And then 1.19 is right about there. So now I can graph my parabola. And there's a few things we can look at. So it's facing down, which makes sense because we have a negative a. My axis of symmetry, so if you wanted to get more points, you're more than welcome to. You could reflect it over your axis of symmetry. And now looking at our graph, we can find our domain and range. Now for any parabola, the domain is always going to be the same. But if you're looking at it, remember it's your x values. So there's an arrow to an arrow, which means we're going from negative infinity to infinity, which no matter what, any parabola is always going to be all real numbers. You don't really have to, unfortunately, think much about it. So then the range, remember, is going from bottom to top. So we're looking and we're getting arrows. So that means this is going on forever and ever and ever and ever. So we start at negative infinity. And as we go up, well, the tallest point, the highest point, which is the vertex, is my y value of my vertex, which is 4.125 with a bracket. Okay, that wraps up problem number 2. So I am going to move on to number 3, kind of going along the same page. Still dealing with these lovely vertex parabolas, and now basically what it's saying is find the function. So we know that we want our functions always written in the form f of x is equal to a times x minus h squared plus k. So this is the form that we want it in. Now, at the end of it, the numbers or the values that I want a, h, and k. So I want those to be plugged into. I want to have values for those. When I'm writing it down here, I'm leaving x there and I'm leaving f of x there. So I'm looking at my given information and it says my vertex is at negative 1, negative 3. So my vertex, which is my x is my h value, and y is my k value. And the parabola passes through the point negative 3, negative 11. So that's giving us an x value and a y value that's on the graph. So we have a y value, we have an x value, we have an h value, we have a k value. All we need is our a value. So what we're going to do is just plug it in to solve for our a value. So in for f of x, remember y is interchangeable with f of x. So in for f of x, I'm going to plug in negative 11 equals, now my a, that's the one that I don't have, that's the one that I'm trying to solve for. And then x, which is negative 3, minus h, which is negative 1 squared, plus k, which is negative 3. Okay, so at this point, I would make this a positive, and then I would continue. So negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2, and negative 2 squared is 4. And then I would add 3 to both sides to get negative 8, which is equal to 4a. I would divide everything through by 4 to get a all by itself. And now I have a is equal to negative 2. So now I have my a value, I have my h value, and I have my k value. So I can just plug all that information in to my function. So negative 2x minus my h value. So since my h value is negative, I'm going to make it plus 1 squared minus 3. Now, make sure you understand this because this one is then going to be used later and going to help us with number 5 when we get to that one. So that wraps up the problem for number 3.